The fluorescent lights of the Pentagon's West Corridor hummed their eternal monotone as Admiral Marcus Hendricks moved through the late evening silence, his shoes clicking against polished floors that had witnessed decades of decisions that shaped nations. His mind was still processing the classified briefing he'd just left. Another crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, another delicate dance with protocols and politics. He barely registered the woman pushing the industrial cleaning cart, her navy blue uniform marking her as part of the invisible workforce that kept these halls pristine. She was perhaps mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, moving with an efficiency that spoke of someone who understood the value of time. What caught his attention wasn't her presence but the small detail pinned to her collar, a silver star medal, dulled slightly with age, catching the harsh overhead light. Hendricks slowed. In 32 years of service, he'd learned to read people, to notice the details others missed. The silver star wasn't something you wore casually. It wasn't something you earned behind a desk. He glanced at her name tag, Rays. The woman continued wiping down the water fountain, seemingly unaware of his scrutiny, her movements methodical and unhurried. There was something in her posture, the way she held her shoulders, that contradicted the submissive invisibility her job required. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the measured authority of rank. She turned, and for just a fraction of a second, her eyes held something he recognized, the quick tactical assessment of someone who'd operated in hostile spaces. Then it was gone, replaced by the polite deference of a service worker addressing a superior. "Yes, sir." He gestured to the medal. "That's quite an honor to wear while working the night shift. Mind if I ask where you earned it?" Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Afghanistan, sir, 2019. The answer came flat, offering nothing beyond the minimum required by politeness. "What branch?" "Air Force, sir. I separated in 2021. Something in her clipped responses intrigued him. Most veterans loved sharing their stories, especially to someone who'd understand. Her reluctance suggested either humility or pain, possibly both. He leaned closer to read the engraving on the medal, and the name inscribed there hit him like a missile-locked tone. Captain Vieira, Valkyrie Rays. The call sign alone triggered memories of classified briefings, operational reports marked beyond top secret, and a mission that had been quietly buried under layers of national security protocols. His expression must have changed because her eyes narrowed slightly, waiting for whatever would come next. "Your Valkyrie," he said softly, the word carrying weight that transformed the empty corridor into something else entirely, a bridge between her past and his present, between what she'd become and what she'd been. The woman who'd earned that call sign shouldn't be here, pushing a mop through Pentagon hallways at 11 at night. Something had gone catastrophically wrong, and suddenly Admiral Marcus Hendricks needed to know exactly what. The silence stretched between them like the moment before an aircraft breaks the sound barrier, taut, charged, pregnant with energy that could shatter into thunder. Vera Reyes kept her face carefully neutral, but Hendricks had commanded enough combat operations to recognize the microscopic tells. The slight shift in her breathing, the way her fingers unconsciously tightened on the cart's handle, the muscle that jumped once in her jaw. She was calculating angles, measuring threat levels, deciding whether to engage or evade. Old instincts died hard, even when the battlefield was a Pentagon corridor, and the potential enemy wore stars on his shoulders. "I haven't gone by that call sign in 4 years, sir," she said finally, her tone carefully modulated to discourage further inquiry. She turned back to her cart, reaching for a spray bottle with practiced efficiency. The message was clear. This conversation was over. Hendricks didn't move. "I read the after-action report, what they allowed us to see of it anyway." He paused, choosing his words with the precision of someone navigating a minefield. "Operation Copper Veil, 6 F-18 Super Hornets providing close air support for a SEAL extraction team. Except it wasn't 6 aircraft that came home, was it?" Her hand froze on the spray bottle for just a heartbeat. When she resumed cleaning, her movements were slightly less fluid, the mask slipping by degrees. "5 came home, sir. I'm aware. I was the flight lead." "You were more than flight lead, Captain. According to the classified portions of that report, the ones they let flag officers read, you flew a damaged aircraft through a gauntlet of SA-15 missile systems, drew fire from 5 different positions, and kept a SAM battery locked on you for 11 minutes while the extraction package got clear." His voice dropped lower. "They said you flew patterns that shouldn't be possible, that the G-forces alone should have rendered you unconscious. The Navy pilots who analyzed your flight data said it looked like someone dancing with physics itself." Vera turned fully to face him now, and for the first time he saw past the janitor's uniform to the woman beneath, the pilot who'd earned one of the military's highest honors, the officer who'd commanded respect in a field that rarely gave it freely. "The SEALs got home, sir. That's what mattered. We lost Lieutenant Commander Hayes when his aircraft took shrapnel. His wife was pregnant with their second child." Something flickered in her eyes, an old grief worn smooth by years but never quite forgotten. "I'd make the same choices again." Hendricks studied her with new appreciation. The silver star told part of the story, but the full picture was emerging like a target through clearing smoke. This wasn't just about one mission. This was about what came after, the invisible cost of being exceptional in a system that sometimes punished excellence that came without the right connections or academy pedigree. "Why are you here, Valkyrie? Why aren't you still flying?" She smiled then, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Respectfully, sir, my shift ends at 6 a.m., and I have a 7-year-old daughter who needs breakfast before school. Whatever story you think you're looking at, I promise it's less interesting than you imagine." She moved to push her cart past him, the universal signal that some doors remained closed for good reason. But Hendricks was a SEAL before he was an Admiral, and SEALs were taught to recognize when someone was protecting something important. He didn't block her path, but his voice stopped her anyway. "The extraction team you saved that night, SEAL Team 9, their lieutenant commander wrote a letter to the Chief of Naval Operations requesting you receive the Medal of Honor. Did you know that?" Her shoulders stiffened. "It was downgraded to the Silver Star, sir, chain of command decisions. Above my pay grade then and certainly above it now." "It was downgraded," Hendricks agreed, "because someone in the approval chain decided your actions, while heroic, didn't meet the specific criteria. But that's not why you're here, is it?" The question hung in the air between them like tracer fire in the night sky, beautiful and deadly, illuminating truths that perhaps neither of them wanted fully exposed. Vera's eyes moved past Hendricks to the empty corridor beyond, checking angles of approach the way she'd once checked for surface-to-air threats. The habit was so ingrained she probably didn't even realize she was doing it. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weariness that had nothing to do with pushing a cleaning cart for 8 hours. "You want the official version or the truth, Admiral?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Official version I separated honorably after my contract expired. Personal choice. Wanted to spend more time with family. The truth," she leaned against her cart, and for a moment the Pentagon janitor disappeared entirely, replaced by the combat veteran underneath. "They offered me a desk job at Oceana, public affairs. Told me I'd done enough flying, that my unique perspective would be valuable in recruitment. Translation: we can't have you embarrassing the Academy boys anymore. Be a good poster girl, smile for the cameras, and stop making everyone else look bad." Hendricks felt something cold settle in his gut. He'd seen this pattern before, exceptional operators quietly sidelined because their excellence created uncomfortable comparisons, because they'd achieved without the proper pedigree, because they were different in ways that made the old guard nervous. In Vera's case, the difference was obvious. She was a woman who'd outflown men who thought the sky belonged to them by birthright. "Let me guess," he said, "you declined the desk job." "I declined the desk job," she confirmed. "Turns out single mothers don't have the luxury of dying slowly in a public affairs office for the sake of their pride. I needed benefits, stable hours, and a job that let me be home when Mia got out of school." This, she gestured at her uniform, the cart, the empty corridor, this pays bills. Gives me time with my daughter. Lets me sleep at night knowing I'm not compromising who I am for a system that never wanted me in the first place. The bitterness in her voice was barely contained, and Hendricks understood he was seeing something she probably didn't show often, the raw wound beneath scar tissue. Valkyrie wasn't just your call sign, was it? He asked quietly. It was what you meant to them, the chooser of the slain, the woman who decided who lived and who died. She looked at him sharply. You've done your homework. Norse mythology. The Valkyries served Odin, selected which warriors would die in battle and which would live. In the old stories, they were fierce, autonomous, and feared by men who couldn't control them. He paused. Is that why they gave you the name? Vera's laugh was short and devoid of humor. They gave me the name after my third combat deployment. I just completed a mission over Kandahar. Taliban fighters had pinned down a forward operating base, and we had 8 minutes before they'd be overrun. I put ordnance so close to friendly positions that the JTAC on the ground said he felt the heat blast through his foxhole. Perfect accuracy. 0 friendly casualties. 47 enemy KIA. Her eyes grew distant, seeing something Hendricks couldn't. When I landed, my XO said I flew like a Valkyrie, choosing who lives and who dies with the precision of a goddess. The name stuck. At first it was respect. Then, after Operation Copper Veil, after I kept drawing fire to protect the package, after I proved I could outfly men with twice my experience and 3 times my ego, then it became something else. Something that made people uncomfortable. Hendricks understood implicitly. The military loved heroes until those heroes reminded everyone else of their limitations. Vera Reyes hadn't just been good. She'd been exceptional in ways that couldn't be ignored or explained away. And for that, the system had politely shown her the door. How old is your daughter? He asked, shifting gears. 7, second grade. She wants to be an astronaut. The softness that entered Vera's voice when she mentioned her child was immediate and unguarded. The transformation in Vera's expression when she spoke of her daughter was like watching clouds part after a storm, something genuine and unprotected emerging from beneath layers of tactical reserve. Hendricks recognized it because he'd seen it in mirrors, in the faces of operators who'd learned to compartmentalize everything, except the people they'd gone to war to protect. It was the one vulnerability they'd never master, the single crack in otherwise impenetrable armor. What's her name? He asked, his tone gentler now. Mia Reyes. Vera pulled out her phone, the gesture automatic, universal among parents. The screen showed a young girl with dark hair like her mother's, gap-toothed smile bright enough to light up the Pentagon's classified spaces. She builds model rockets from kits I buy at Target. Has a telescope pointed at her bedroom window. Last week she told me the International Space Station was going to pass overhead at 6:47 p.m., and she dragged me outside to watch it. Stood there in our apartment parking lot, 7 years old, tracking a dot of light across the sky with more focus than most people give their entire lives. Hendricks smiled despite the heaviness settling in his chest. She gets that from you. The focus or the obsession with flying. Vera's voice carried a note of self-deprecation. Both. He studied the photo again. Does she know what you did, who you were? The question made Vera's expression shudder closed again. She tucked the phone away and the walls came back up with practiced efficiency. She knows I was in the Air Force. She knows I flew jets. She doesn't know about the missions, the medal, or why other kids' moms have different jobs. I let her think I chose this, that I wanted to be home more. 7-year-olds don't need to know their mother was forced out of the one thing she was built to do because she did it too well. The admission carried more pain than anger, and Hendricks felt the weight of it. He'd spent 3 decades in special operations, had commanded men and women through situations that would break most people, had written letters to families explaining why their loved ones weren't coming home. But this was a different kind of casualty, one the military rarely acknowledged. The operators who survived combat only to be destroyed by bureaucracy, by politics, by systems that valued conformity over capability. "What if I told you the system made a mistake?" he said carefully. "That there might be a way back." Vera's eyes narrowed, suspicion replacing the momentary vulnerability. "Respectfully, sir, I've heard that before, right before they tried to turn me into a recruitment poster. I'm not interested in being anyone's symbol or token." "I'm not offering you a desk," Hendricks said. "I'm offering you a conversation. Tomorrow, my office, 1800 hours." He pulled out a card, handed it to her. "I'm working on a project that needs someone with your specific skill set. Someone who can fly in situations where the margin for error is measured in milliseconds. Someone who's already proven they can make impossible decisions under circumstances that would paralyze most people." She looked at the card, then back at him. "What kind of project?" "The kind we don't discuss in Pentagon corridors at 11:30 p.m. with civilians walking by." He glanced meaningfully at the approaching security patrol making their rounds. "But I can tell you this. If you come tomorrow, I'll give you the full brief. Classified. No obligations. You hear what I have to say, and if you're not interested, you walk away. I'll never mention this conversation again." Vera turned the card over in her fingers, a pilot's hands, he noticed. Scarred knuckles, short nails, calluses in places that spoke of years gripping control sticks through turbulence and combat. "Why me, Admiral? You could have any pilot in the fleet. Why track down a janitor wearing an old medal?" Hendricks met her eyes. "Because the mission I'm building requires someone who understands that flying isn't just about following procedures. It's about making split-second choices that determine who lives and who dies. It requires someone who's already proven they'll sacrifice everything, career, recognition, even their own survival to bring people home." He paused. "You're not a janitor who used to fly, Captain Reyes. You're a pilot who currently works as a janitor. There's a difference." The words settled between them with the weight of ordnance locked and loaded, waiting for someone to pull the trigger. Vera stared at the business card, reading the simple text: "Rear Admiral Marcus Hendricks, Naval Special Warfare Command." A phone number. Nothing else. The kind of card that said everything and nothing simultaneously. The kind that appeared in the pockets of people about to cross thresholds they couldn't uncross. "I have to pick up Mia from after-school care by 6:15, she said finally. "Her grandmother watches her until I get home, but Mrs. Chen is 78 and gets tired easily. I can't just—" "Bring her," Hendricks interrupted. "There's a family lounge on the 3rd floor. Toys, books, tablets with games. She can wait there while we talk, 30 minutes. If you don't like what you hear, you're out the door and I've bought Mia a pizza for her trouble." Vera looked up sharply. "You're that confident I'll be interested?" "I'm that confident you're still the woman who flew into a missile envelope because SEALs needed extraction. That woman doesn't just disappear because the institution failed to recognize her value. She just finds other places to matter." He straightened, preparing to leave. 1800 hours, Captain. 3rd floor, office 314. Security will have your name." He started to walk away, then paused. "One more thing. The SEAL lieutenant commander who wrote that letter recommending you for the Medal of Honor. His name was Grant Hawkins. He retired last year, but before he left, he made sure every operator in Naval Special Warfare knew about Valkyrie. About the Air Force pilot who saved his entire team when everything went sideways. You're not forgotten, Captain Reyes. Not by the people who matter." Then he was gone, shoes clicking against polished floors, disappearing around the corner with the same purposeful efficiency he'd arrived with. Vera stood alone in the empty corridor, fluorescent lights humming their monotonous song, cleaning cart waiting beside her like a patient animal. She looked at the card again, then at the silver star on her collar. The metal was cool against her fingertips, dulled by years of being worn and removed, a talisman of a life that felt increasingly like it had belonged to someone else. But Hendricks was right about one thing: that woman hadn't disappeared. She just learned to hide to protect herself and her daughter from the disappointment of hopping for second chances that never materialized. Flying wasn't just what Vera did, it was who she was. The sky wasn't a workplace, it was home. The cockpit wasn't an office, it was the one place she'd ever felt completely, unquestionably herself. Giving that up had been like amputating a limb and being told to be grateful for the prosthetic. She glanced at her watch. 4 hours left on her shift. 4 hours of mopping floors and emptying trash cans and being invisible to people who walked these halls making decisions that shaped the world. Then home to her one-bedroom apartment, to Mia asleep on the couch because she'd insisted on waiting up, to the breakfast routine and the school drop-off and the 14-hour gap before her next shift started at 6 p.m. It was a life. It paid bills. It kept them fed and housed and safe. But was it living? Vera tucked the card into her pocket, felt the sharp edges press against her thigh through the thin fabric of her uniform. Tomorrow at 1800 hours, she'd find out what kind of conversation was worth an admiral personally tracking her down. She'd hear whatever classified brief required her specific skill set. She'd listen with the tactical assessment skills that had kept her alive through 4 combat deployments. And then she'd decide whether hope was a luxury she could still afford, or a trap waiting to break her all over again. She returned to cleaning, but her mind was already elsewhere, already calculating flight paths and possibilities, already feeling the phantom weight of a control stick in her hands and the G-forces of a hard turn pressing against her chest. Some instincts, she realized, never truly died. They just waited. The afternoon sun cut through the Pentagon's windows at aggressive angles, turning the corridors into geometric studies of light and shadow. Vera walked with Mia's small hand tucked firmly in hers, the girl's backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she craned her neck to take in the building's austere magnificence. 7 years old and already cataloging details with an engineer's precision. The ceiling height, the marble floors, the portraits of stern-faced officers watching from walls that had seen more history than most textbooks contained. "Why are we here, Mama?" Mia asked for the 3rd time, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "You said you worked at night." "Something came up," Vera said, keeping her tone light despite the tension coiling in her gut. "A meeting. Won't take long." "Is this about flying?" The question came with too much perception, the kind that made Vera wonder what her daughter understood that she'd never explicitly shared. Kids absorbed more than adults gave them credit for, picking up the things left unsaid in the spaces between words. "Maybe," Vera admitted. "We'll see." They reached the 3rd floor, and true to Hendrix's word, security had their names on a list. A young lieutenant with a crisp uniform and a polite smile escorted them to the family lounge, a surprisingly comfortable space with soft couches, a television playing a muted animated movie, and bins full of toys that looked recently sanitized. 2 other children were already there, absorbed in building blocks under the watchful eye of a civilian caretaker who introduced herself as Patricia. Mia's eyes widened at the setup. "This is for me." "While I talk to someone," Vera confirmed. 30 minutes, maybe less. You okay here?" Her daughter was already gravitating toward a shelf of books about space exploration, her backpack sliding forgotten to the floor. "Can I read any of these?" "All of them if you want." Vera felt something in her chest constrict at how easily Mia's attention shifted to learning, to discovery. Her daughter had inherited more than her dark hair and stubborn chin. She'd inherited the hunger for something beyond ground level, the need to understand systems and patterns, and the physics that governed motion through space. Patricia caught Vera's eye, gave a reassuring nod. "She'll be fine, take your time." Office 314 was located at the corridor's end, door slightly ajar, yellow light spilling into the hallway. Vera paused outside, straightening her civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain blue shirt, nothing that screamed former military officer. She'd left the Silver Star at home, tucked in its case beside Mia's baby photos and the folded flag from her father's funeral. Some things didn't need to be worn to be remembered. She knocked twice, Permission to enter, Admiral. Granted. Hendrix's voice carried the easy authority of someone comfortable in their position. Come in, Captain Reyes. The office was smaller than she'd expected, less formal. A desk covered in neat stacks of files, 3 computer monitors showing what looked like satellite feeds and operational maps, walls decorated with commendations and photos spanning a career. But what caught her attention was the second person in the room, a woman in her mid-40s wearing a Navy captain's uniform, dark skin, sharp eyes that assessed Vera with the instant calibration of someone who'd evaluated countless pilots and found most of them wanting. Captain Reyes, Hendrix said, rising from behind his desk. This is Captain Angela Morrison, commanding officer of VFA 213, the Black Lions. She's here because what I'm about to discuss directly involves her squadron. Morrison extended her hand. Your reputation precedes you, Valkyrie. I've read the classified after-action reports. Impressive doesn't begin to cover it. Vera shook her hand, feeling the strength in Morrison's grip. Ma'am. Please sit. Hendrix gestured to the chairs arranged in front of his desk. Once they were settled, he pulled out a tablet, tapped a few commands, and the overhead lights dimmed slightly as one of the monitors switched to display a satellite image. What I'm about to tell you is classified top secret, code word Sapphire Midnight. Before we continue, I need your verbal acknowledgement that you understand the restrictions. The weight of those words settled over Vera like the pre-flight checklist before a combat sortie, familiar, heavy, consequential. Code word classifications meant compartmented information, the kind that ended careers and resulted in federal prison if mishandled. She'd held clearances like that once, had sat in rooms where the wrong sentence could trigger international incidents. But that was when she'd been Captain Reyes, combat pilot, officer with a future. Now she was Vera Reyes, janitor, single mother, person who existed at the periphery of the world that had once been her entire identity. I understand, sir, she said, her voice steady. Old training died hard. Classified top secret, code word Sapphire Midnight. I acknowledge the restrictions and the consequences of unauthorized disclosure. Hendrix nodded, satisfied. He tapped the tablet again, and the satellite image zoomed in on a region Vera recognized instantly. The South China Sea, the contested waters where international law and territorial ambitions collided in a slow-motion chess game played with warships and fighter jets. Red markings indicated Chinese military installations on artificial islands, growing like tumors across strategic waterways. Blue markers showed U.S. and Allied positions, maintaining freedom of navigation through increasingly hostile airspace. 3 weeks ago, Hendrix began, Chinese forces shot down a Taiwanese F-16 conducting routine patrol along the median line. The pilot ejected, was recovered by Taiwanese forces. Beijing claimed the aircraft violated their airspace. Taipei produced flight data proving otherwise. The usual diplomatic theater ensued: condemnations, emergency UN Security Council meetings, strongly worded statements that accomplished nothing. He paused, letting that sink in. What didn't make the news is that Chinese surface-to-air missile systems locked onto 7 other aircraft that day, 4 Taiwanese, 2 Japanese, 1 Australian, all in international airspace, all within kill parameters. They're testing response times, gathering electronic signatures, pushing boundaries to see where the actual red line exists. Captain Morrison leaned forward. The situation is escalating. Chinese pilots are flying more aggressively, violating safety protocols that have prevented mid-air collisions for 2 decades. Last week, one of our Super Hornets had a J-20 stealth fighter pass within 50 feet during a routine patrol. 50 feet at 500 knots. That's not intercept procedure, that's intimidation. Vera studied the map, her tactical mind automatically calculating angles, distances, response times. What does this have to do with me, sir? I've been out for 4 years. My clearances are expired, and I'm pretty sure the Air Force isn't interested in bringing me back to fly over contested waters." "You're right," Hendricks said. "They're not, but naval special warfare is." He pulled up another image, this time, a sleek aircraft that made Vera's breath catch. It looked like something from a science fiction film. Angular surfaces designed for minimal radar cross-section, canards and thrust-vectoring nozzles suggesting maneuverability beyond conventional limits, cockpit transparency that seemed to offer 360-degree visibility. This is the YF-49 Wraith. It's a joint development project between Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, designed for a very specific mission profile: electronic warfare and close air support in denied environments where conventional aircraft can't operate without unacceptable risk. He zoomed in on specifications scrolling beside the image. Supercruise capability without afterburners. Radar signature smaller than a Sparrow. Avionics suite that can identify, track, and jam multiple air defense systems simultaneously. And this is the part that requires your unique skills, flight characteristics that push human tolerance to absolute limits. The G-forces during combat maneuvers routinely exceed 9 GS. The flight computer requires a pilot who can make instantaneous decisions while experiencing near-blackout conditions. Out of 40 pilots we've tested, only 3 completed the evaluation without multiple safety interventions. Morrison picked up the thread. The YF-49 isn't designed to be forgiving. It's designed to be effective. In simulations, it can penetrate Chinese air defense networks, conduct precision strikes, and extract before enemy forces can coordinate a response. But it requires a pilot with exceptional spatial awareness, split-second decision-making under physiological stress, and the ability to fly patterns that seem impossible until someone proves they're not. Vera felt her heart accelerating, old instincts waking from forced hibernation. "You want me to evaluate this aircraft?" "We want you to fly it," Hendricks corrected, "not as an evaluation, as a mission." The words hung in the air like ordnance waiting to detonate. Vera stared at the screen, at the aircraft that looked more like a predator than a machine, and felt something she hadn't experienced in 4 years beginning to burn in her chest. Not just interest, hunger. The kind that made her fingers itch for a control stick, made her body remember the feeling of acceleration pressing her into the ejection seat, made her mind automatically calculate the physics of turning energy into motion through 3-dimensional space. "What kind of mission?" she asked, keeping her voice level despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. Hendricks glanced at Morrison, who nodded. "Intelligence indicates China is preparing to conduct a major military exercise in the South China Sea, codenamed Red Storm by their forces. The exercise will involve live-fire drills in international shipping lanes, effectively closing critical waterways for 72 hours. They're claiming it's routine training. Our analysts believe it's preparation for a blockade scenario, a rehearsal for sealing off Taiwan if Beijing decides diplomatic options have been exhausted." He pulled up another image, this one showing a massive naval formation. Destroyers, cruisers, amphibious assault ships, submarines, all arrayed in a pattern that looked less like training and more like an invasion force. "During Red Storm, we need eyes on their actual capabilities. Satellite imagery only tells us so much. We need electronic signatures from their newest air defense systems, acoustic data on their submarines, thermal imaging of their radar installations. We need to know if this is posturing or preparation." "And you want me to fly into the middle of that," Vera said slowly, "in an experimental aircraft to gather intelligence while they're conducting live-fire exercises." "In the middle would be suicide," Morrison said dryly. "We want you to fly along the periphery, using the Wraith's stealth capabilities to penetrate their sensor networks just far enough to collect actionable data. You'd launch from a carrier, conduct the mission during a narrow window when their air defenses are focused on the exercise itself, and return before they realize you were ever there." She paused. "In theory." "In theory," Vera repeated. "What's the realistic assessment?" Hendricks didn't flinch. Realistically, this is the highest-risk mission profile we've planned in a decade. If something goes wrong, mechanical failure if you're detected, if their response time is faster than projected, you'll be in hostile airspace with no support assets, no backup, no way to explain what a U.S. aircraft was doing that deep in their operations zone. Politically, we disavow the mission. You'd be considered a rogue operator. China would have every justification to respond with force. And if I'm shot down, then we lose a pilot and an experimental aircraft worth $3 billion, Morrison said bluntly. And China gains access to technology that gives them a 10-year leap in stealth capabilities. The mission gets scrubbed, the intelligence gap remains, and we're back to making strategic decisions based on incomplete information while they continue pushing boundaries without consequence. Vera sat back, processing the full scope of what they were proposing. This wasn't a training exercise or a routine patrol. This was a single aircraft penetration into one of the most heavily defended airspaces on Earth, flown by someone who'd been out of the cockpit for 4 years, in a machine that pushed human physiology to its limits. The margin for error wasn't just thin, it was non-existent. One mistake, 1 second of hesitation, one mechanical failure, and she'd be dead or captured, triggering a crisis that could spiral into open conflict. "Why me?" she asked again. "You said 3 pilots completed the evaluation. Why not use one of them?" Hendricks met her eyes. "Because the mission requires more than someone who can fly the aircraft. It requires someone who understands that the objective isn't getting there, it's getting home. Someone who's already proven they can operate in scenarios where everything goes wrong and still bring people back alive. Someone who won't panic when the missile warning system starts screaming, when the G-forces are crushing their chest, when every instinct says to abort but the mission requires pushing forward anyway." "Operation Copper Veil," Morrison added quietly. "You flew with a damaged aircraft through a threat environment that should have killed you. You improvised tactics that had never been attempted. You accepted that you might die but refused to let that stop you from completing the objective. That's not something we can train, Captain Reyes. That's something you either have or you don't." Vera felt the weight of their expectations settling across her shoulders like a flight harness, familiar and confining and strangely comforting all at once. They were offering her exactly what she'd thought was lost forever, the chance to fly, to matter, to be Valkyrie instead of the invisible janitor pushing a cart through halls where nobody saw her. But they were also asking her to risk everything: her life, her daughter's future, the fragile stability she'd built from the wreckage of her military career. "I need to think about this," she said carefully. "I have a daughter, a 7-year-old who's already lost enough. Her father deployed before she was born, KIA in Syria before she turned 2. I'm all she has. If something happens to me—" "We know," Hendricks interrupted gently. "Staff Sergeant Miguel Reyes, Marine Corps, killed in action July 2018. Convoy ambush outside Al-Tanf. You were 7 months pregnant, stationed at Al-Udeid, flying combat missions while he was on his 4th deployment." He paused. "I'm not going to tell you the risk is minimal or that we can guarantee your safety. I won't insult your intelligence that way. This mission has maybe a 60% success probability under optimal conditions." "Those aren't great odds." "They're terrible odds," Vera corrected. "They are," Morrison agreed. "But here's what else is true. If we don't gather this intelligence, if we don't understand what China is actually capable of versus what they want us to believe they're capable of, then the next time they decide to push boundaries, we'll be making decisions based on assumptions. And in this business, assumptions get people killed, not just pilots, but the people we're sworn to protect. The sailors on those ships, the civilians depending on those shipping lanes, the allies who trust that we'll maintain stability in waters that keep the global economy functioning." Vera looked at the screen again, at the Wraith's predatory silhouette. "When would the mission happen?" "Red Storm is scheduled to begin in 6 days, Hendricks said. "We'd need you at Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada tomorrow for accelerated training. 3 days in the simulator, 2 days in the actual aircraft. The mission launch would occur on day 6 from the USS Carl Vinson, currently positioned in the Philippine Sea. 6 days. Not even a week to train on an experimental aircraft, to refresh skills that had been gathering dust for 4 years, to prepare for a mission that could end with her vaporized by a Chinese surface-to-air missile or captured and paraded on state television as proof of American aggression. 6 days to decide if the person she'd been, Valkyrie, the chooser of the slain, was still alive inside the person she'd become. "I need to talk to my daughter," Vera said finally, "and I need 24 hours to arrange care for her if I decide to do this." Hendricks nodded. "Understood. But Captain Reyes, I need you to understand something else. If you accept this mission, there's no turning back. Once you're briefed on the full operational details, once you begin training, you're committed. We can't have someone with knowledge of Sapphire Midnight deciding halfway through that the risk is too high. The security implications alone." "I understand, sir." Vera stood and both officers rose with her. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow by 1800 hours. If it's yes, I'll need assurances about Mia's care, military-provided support, someone I trust, not just thrown into the system." "Done," Morrison said immediately. "We'll arrange whatever you need. Full benefits, survivor's insurance, legal documentation ensuring she's protected if worst-case scenarios occur. You have my word." Vera nodded, started toward the door, then paused. "One more question. The 3 pilots who completed the evaluation, where are they now?" Hendricks's expression became carefully neutral. "One is recovering from a training accident. Dislocated shoulder, minor concussion. One requested transfer back to conventional aircraft after experiencing repeated blackouts during high-G maneuvers. The third," he hesitated, "the third is available as backup if you decline." "But you came to me first." "We came to you first," he confirmed, "because the mission requires someone who won't break when the pressure becomes unbearable. Someone who's already been tested in ways that can't be simulated. Someone who understands that sacrifice isn't just a word. It's a choice you make every time you climb into a cockpit and point your aircraft toward danger." Vera absorbed that, then left without another word. The drive home took 40 minutes through traffic that moved like cold honey, slow, thick, suffocating. Mia sat in the backseat, absorbed in a book about the solar system that Patricia had let her borrow from the lounge, occasionally reading aloud facts about Jupiter's moons or Saturn's rings with the unconscious enthusiasm of someone discovering magic. Vera let her daughter's voice wash over her, a counterweight to the tactical calculations spinning through her mind like an out-of-control aircraft in a flat spin. 60% success probability, $3 billion aircraft, 6 days of training, single pilot penetration into hostile airspace during active military exercises, no backup, no support, no margin for error. And if successful, what? A medal she wouldn't be allowed to wear, a mission nobody could ever know about. The satisfaction of knowing she'd gathered intelligence that might prevent a war, might save lives, might justify the risk she'd be taking with Mia's future. She parked in their apartment complex, a modest structure in a neighborhood that was safe enough but not quite making it into the definition of comfortable. Rent was manageable on her janitor's salary if she was careful. The schools were decent. Mia had friends. It was stable, predictable, safe. Everything Vera had promised herself she'd provide after Miguel died and left her alone with a newborn and a career that demanded everything she had. Inside, Mia went straight to her room, really a corner of the living room separated by a folding screen, but her daughter had never complained. The space was decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, posters of spacecraft, a small telescope pointed toward the window. Vera stood in the doorway, watching Mia arrange her model rockets by size, her small hands careful and precise. "Mama," Mia said without turning around, "that meeting today, it was about flying, wasn't it?" No point lying. Kids could smell deception from a mile away. "Yes." Are you going to fly again? The question came quietly, almost afraid, and Vera's heart constricted. She crossed the room, sat on the edge of Mia's bed. Maybe, I don't know yet. Her daughter turned then, dark eyes too serious for 7 years old. Will you be gone a long time? If I go, it would be about 2 weeks, maybe a little more. The lie came easily. She couldn't tell Mia the truth, couldn't explain that she might not come back at all. But I wouldn't go unless I was sure you'd be taken care of. Mrs. Chen could stay here, or maybe we could arrange something with Aunt Rosa in California. Mia considered this with the gravity of someone weighing enormous decisions. Do you want to fly again? The question cut straight through every tactical consideration, every strategic assessment, every rational argument Vera had been constructing. Want wasn't something she'd allowed herself to consider in years. Want was dangerous. Want led to disappointment. Want was the enemy of survival. But sitting here in this small apartment, watching her daughter wait for an honest answer, Vera couldn't hide behind pragmatism anymore. Yes, she admitted, I want to fly again. Mia nodded slowly, like Daddy wanted to be a Marine. The comparison landed like a missile strike, accurate and devastating. Miguel had wanted to serve, had believed in something bigger than himself, had chosen danger because the alternative, living safely while others took risks, had been unacceptable to him. He'd paid for that choice with his life, had left Mia fatherless and Vera alone with grief that never quite faded, just learned to coexist with the daily necessities of survival. Yes, Vera said again, like Daddy. Then you should go, Mia said with the simple logic of childhood. Because if you stay here being sad about not flying, you'll be like Mrs. Patterson next door who talks about how she used to dance but never does anymore. And you're not like her, Mama. You're like the astronauts in my books. They're not happy unless they're going up. Vera pulled her daughter close, pressed her face into dark hair that smelled like strawberry shampoo and innocence. When did you get so smart? I'm 7, Mia said seriously. That's practically grown up. They stayed like that for a long moment, mother and daughter, two people bound by blood and loss and a future that remained uncertain no matter what choices were made. Finally, Vera pulled back, wiped at eyes that had gotten suspiciously damp. I need to make some phone calls, she said. Start getting things ready just in case. The next 24 hours moved with the accelerated pace of a pre-flight checklist. Each item ticked off with mechanical efficiency, even as Vera's mind wrestled with the enormity of the decision crystallizing before her. She called Aunt Rosa in San Diego, explained she had a job opportunity that would require travel, arranged for Mia to stay there if needed. Rosa had questions, too many questions, but she'd raised Vera after her own parents died, understood when to push and when to accept that some things couldn't be explained over the phone. She called Mrs. Chen, who agreed to help with the apartment, to forward mail, to make sure plants didn't die and bills got paid. The elderly woman had been their neighbor since they'd moved in, had watched Mia during evening shifts, had never asked for more than Vera could afford to pay. You take care of yourself, Mrs. Chen said in her accented English, voice carrying the weight of someone who'd fled one war and recognized the signs of another brewing. That girl needs her mother. Vera updated her will, contacted the military's legal assistance office to ensure paperwork was current, made sure Mia's guardianship documentation was bulletproof, that Rosa would have access to Vera's bank accounts, that survivor benefits would flow without bureaucratic tangles if the worst happened. It was grim work, the kind that forced her to confront mortality in specifics rather than abstractions, but it was also necessary. Miguel hadn't left paperwork in order, and the months after his death had been a nightmare of forms and phone calls and proving. She was entitled to benefits everyone agreed she deserved, but nobody could process efficiently. She wouldn't do that to Mia. By 1700 hours the next day, she was standing outside Hendrix's office again, this time without her daughter, wearing clothes that felt like armor, dark jeans, leather jacket, boots with good tread. Not a uniform, but not civilian softness either. Something in between, which felt appropriate for the liminal space she occupied between her past and whatever came next. She knocked, permission to enter, Admiral. Granted. Hendricks was alone this time, office lights dimmed, screens showing what looked like weather patterns over the Philippine Sea. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression suggested he already knew her answer. Captain Reyes. I'll fly the mission, Vera said without preamble. I need the documentation we discussed, care arrangements for my daughter, legal protections, survivor benefits. And I need your word that if something happens to me, someone will make sure Mia knows the truth when she's old enough. Not the classified details, but the fact that I chose this. That I didn't leave her because I didn't love her enough to stay. Hendricks stood, extended his hand. You have my word. Everything you need will be arranged before you leave for Fallen tomorrow at 0600 hours. We'll have a dedicated family support coordinator assigned to your case, someone who will ensure Mia's transition to your aunt's care is as smooth as possible. Vera shook his hand, felt the firmness of his grip, the unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. This was real now. No more hypotheticals or possibilities. She just agreed to climb into an experimental aircraft and fly into one of the most dangerous airspaces on Earth for a mission that might not even be possible. When do I get the full briefing? She asked. Tonight, there's a car waiting downstairs. We'll take you to a secure facility where you'll meet the rest of the team, mission planners, intelligence analysts, the ground crew who will support you at Fallen. Tomorrow you start training. He paused. Captain Morrison will be your primary point of contact. She'll fly out with you to Nevada, oversee the simulator work. The YF-49's chief test pilot, Commander Sarah Chen, will handle your transition to the actual aircraft. 2 days of flight time before the actual mission, Vera said. That's not much margin for learning a new platform. It's not, Hendricks agreed. Which is why we're betting on your ability to adapt quickly. The Wraith is unlike anything you've flown, more responsive, more demanding, less forgiving of mistakes. But the fundamental principles remain the same. Stick and rudder, energy management, situational awareness. You know how to fly. We're just giving you a new tool to do it with. Vera nodded, accepting the reality of accelerated timelines and compressed training windows. It wasn't ideal, but warfare rarely happened on convenient schedules. One more thing, Hendricks said as she turned to leave. The call sign Valkyrie, do you want to use it for this mission or prefer something else? She paused in the doorway. The name carried so much weight, so much history. It was who she'd been when she was fearless, when the sky belonged to her and death was just another navigation point to avoid. But it was also who she'd become after, the woman who'd been punished for excellence, pushed out for making others uncomfortable, reduced to invisibility by a system that couldn't handle what she represented. Valkyrie, she said firmly,